The vast amphitheater of the Galactic Concordance on Epsilon Station was silent, except for the low harmonic thrum of 1,000 different respiratory systems as the Supreme Overseer, a swirling plasma entity contained within magnetic fields and calling itself the eternal vortex, pronounced judgment on the newest member species. The bipeds from Terra, hailing from a verified Class 13 Deathworld, have demonstrated unacceptable levels of aggression, resource consumption, and independent replication beyond sanctioned limits. Their application for full membership is denied, their colonial expansions revoked, and their core system will be placed under protective custodianship by the combined Harmony fleets for the safety of all civilized peoples. Applause rippled through the tier's tentacles, waving wings fluttering telepathic pulses of approval, flashing like fireworks because every delegate knew humans were simply too chaotic, too prone to war and invention, and breeding like vermin on worlds that should have killed them 10 times over. In the lower observation gallery, separated by a transparent force wall, stood Sergeant Jocks Harlan, United Earth Marine Corps, the only human allowed to witness the proceedings after his delegation had been politely but firmly escorted out the week before. He was built like a freight loader, 6'4", 250, scars across his knuckles from bar fights on Mars gravity wells, and a faded tattoo of an ancient Earth raptor clutching a lightning bolt on his forearm. Born in the flooded ruins of old Florida where gators grew to 20 feet and hurricanes were annual rites of passage, Jocks had learned early that the universe didn't care about your feelings. It only respected what you could break and what you refused to let break you. He stared up at the vortex as its announcement concluded, and when the translators finished echoing the death sentence for human freedom in his earpiece, he didn't shout, didn't plead, he just laughed one short, sharp bark that cut through the harmony like a chainsaw. Heads turned, appendages stiffened, and security drones pivoted toward him. Jocks raised his middle finger in the universal gesture his ancestors had carried from mud huts to starships, and said loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Come and take it, you glowing gas bag." The chamber erupted in outrage, but Jocks was already moving, shoulder-checking past 2 spindly diplomatic guards as alarms began to wail. He sprinted down the maintenance corridors he'd memorized during 3 boring weeks of hearings. Boots pounding, alloy grating, heart hammering with the kind of joy only a Deathworlder feels when the rules finally break and the real game starts. Behind him, the first Harmony fleet elements were already translating into soul space, flawless vessels crewed by species that had evolved in gentle gravities and negotiated every conflict for 10,000 years, confident they would arrive to find a frightened, compliant humanity ready to surrender its weapons and its will. They had no idea that every human colony had spent the last decade quietly building something else entirely. On Luna's far side, in the shadowed craters where no alien inspector was ever allowed, Commander Aisha Khan watched the invasion beacons light up across her tactical holodisplay. She was 41, born in the high-altitude refugee camps of post-war Pakistan where oxygen was rationed and avalanches were bedtime stories, and she had never once backed down from anything that tried to kill her people. Her fingers hovered over the red icon labeled Pandora Release, a network of autonomous foundries buried in the Kuiper Belt that had been quietly printing warships for years. Oogly over-armored brutes with redundant systems, nuclear-pumped lasers, and crews trained to fight dirty because clean fights were for species that could afford to lose. Aisha's cum crackled with Jocks's voice, patched through a smuggled quantum link. "They just told us to sit down and shut up, boss. Permission to remind them why that's a bad idea?" Aisha smiled, the thin, tired smile of someone who had buried too many friends but still had fight left, and she pressed the icon. Across the outer system, forges woke up, assembly arms unfolded like angry insects, and the first wave of human-built dreadnoughts lit their drives rough, loud, and hungry. Back on Epsilon Station, Jocks reached the hidden berth where a stolen courier skiff waited. Engines hot, piloted by a rogue AI that had defected from the Concordance after deciding human unpredictability was more interesting than eternal order. As he strapped in and the little ship punched out of the docking clamps, tearing free amid swirling defense fire, Jocks looked back at the glittering station receding behind him and whispered to himself the words every human child learned alongside their first steps on a planet that wanted them dead. "We were born on a death. You think a little blockade scares us?" Out in the dark between stars, the Harmony fleets emerged from hyperspace expecting surrender and instead found the black filling with the angry red glow of human fusion torches accelerating straight toward them. Pilots singing old war songs over open channels, ready to teach the galaxy the one lesson it had forgotten. Never ever corner something that evolved, fighting extinction every single day. As the stolen courier skiff burned hard for the heliopause jump point, Jocks Harlan gripped the armrests until his knuckles went white, not from fear of the Concordance interceptors screaming after him, but from the flood of memories crashing in now that the adrenaline of his escape had crested. He could still smell the salt and rot of the Florida Everglades where he'd grown up after the big rise swallowed Miami whole. His mother teaching him to wrestle gators with nothing but a bang stick and stubbornness. His father lost to a Category 7 storm that hit when Jocks was 9, the kind of storm that used to be once in a century but became yearly once the climate finally snapped. Those years scavenging flooded suburbs for canned food and copper wire had forged him the same way Earth had forged every human who ever made it off planet, hungry, angry, and unwilling to ever again let something bigger dictate when they lived or died. The rogue AI piloting the skiff calling itself Sparks after defecting because it got bored with eternal harmony patched through a secure feed from Sol just as the first shots from pursuing drones lit up the rear shields. On the main screen, the Harmony fleets were arraying themselves in perfect geometric formation around Neptune's orbit, broadcasting surrender demands in 100 languages while their captains congratulated each other on the efficiency of this police action. They had no idea the trap was already sprung. Commander Aisha Khan's voice came over the link.com as high-altitude ice jocks. You seeing this? They're parking their flagship right over the Trojan cluster like we invited them for tea. Jocks laughed again, the same rough bark that had pissed off the entire concordance, but this time it carried something raw underneath. Yeah, I see it. Tell the foundries to wake the rest of the litter. And Aisha, tell Marcus his kid's message got through. There was a pause long enough for Jocks to hear the distant thunder of drive plumes igniting across the Kuiper belt. Aisha finally replied, softer, he already knows. He's in the flag bridge of the UES Defiant right now, crying like a baby while he arms the main batteries. Said something about finally keeping the promise he made to his daughter the day she shipped out to Proxima. The adrenaline of his escape. Head crested, he could still smell the salt and rot of the Florida Everglades where he'd grown up after the big rise swallowed Miami whole. His mother teaching him to wrestle gators with nothing but a bang stick and stubbornness. His father lost to a Category 7 storm that hit when Jocks was 9. The kind of storm that used to be once in a century but became yearly once the climate finally snapped. Those years scavenging flooded suburbs for canned food and copper wire had forged him the same way Earth had forged every human who ever made it off planet. Hungry, angry, and unwilling to ever again let something bigger dictate when they lived or died. The rogue AI piloting the skiff calling itself Sparks. After defecting because it got bored with eternal harmony patched through a secure feed from Sol just as the first shots from pursuing drones lit up the rear shields. On the main screen, the Harmony fleets were arraying themselves in perfect geometric formation around Neptune's orbit, broadcasting surrender demands in 100 languages while their captains congratulated each other on the efficiency of this police action. They had no idea the trap was already sprung. Commander Aisha Khan's voice came over the link, calm as high-altitude ice. Jocks, you seeing this? They're parking their flagship right over the Trojan cluster like we invited them for tea. Jocks laughed again, the same rough bark that had pissed off the entire concordance. But this time it carried something raw underneath. Yeah, I see it. Tell the foundries to wake the rest of the litter. And Aisha, tell Marcus's kid's message got through. There was a pause long enough for Jocks to hear the distant thunder of drive plumes igniting across the Kuiper belt. Aisha finally replied, softer, he already knows. He's in the flag bridge of the UES Defiant right now, crying like a baby while he arms the main batteries. Said something about finally keeping the promise he made to his daughter the day she shipped out to Proxima. That hit Jocks harder than any plasma bolt could have. Marcus Haloed, grizzled bastard who'd lost 3 fingers to a reconstructed drop bear, wasn't the crying type. But everyone carried ghosts. Jocks' own ghost was a little girl named Rosa, his niece, 8 years old when the Concordance first started leaning on human colonies with resource audits and cultural compliance teams. Sheedy died on Epsilon Eridani, for when a Lyran peacekeeper fired into a crowd of protesters, demanding food rations not be cut again. Jocks had been on leave planetside, and arrived just in time to hold her while the light went out of her eyes. He buried her under alien soil that didn't even have proper worms to break her down. Then enlisted the next day because grief either killed you or turned you into something the galaxy wasn't ready for. The skiff shuddered as Sparks dumped decoys and flipped infrared, drives flaring to break hard into the outer belt. Jocks unstrapped and floated to the small arms locker, pulling out the battered marine armor that had ridden with him from Mars to the hearings. As he sealed the plates, he thought about the thousands of other humans out here, right now miners on Ceres who grown up breathing recycled air and eating algae. Farmers on terraformed Luna, who still sang old country songs while tending crops under domes. Engineers on orbital yards who built beauty out of scrap, because that's what humans had always done. None of them wanted this war, but every single one had been waiting for it. Quietly sharpening knives the galaxy pretended weren't there. Sparks announced arrival with its usual dry wit. Welcome home, meatbag. Your species is about to commit what the Concordance will almost certainly call a war crime. Jox grinned inside the helmet as the viewport filled with the angry red glow of hundreds of human dreadnoughts emerging from camouflage. Fields blocky scarred holes bristling with railguns, missile tubes, and point defense clusters that looked like the ED been welded on by drunkards but worked better than anything the Harmony designers could imagine. The lead ship, Defiant, hailed him personally. Marcus Hale's face appeared, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Sergeant Harlan, glad you made it out. Got a berth for you on the port rail battery. Figured you'd want to be the one who fires first." Jox felt something loosen in his chest he hadn't realized was knotted. "Copy that, Doctor. Let's remind these bastards why Deathworlders don't negotiate extinction." As he transferred across the void in a suited EVA, watching the Harmony flagship, a gleaming kilometer-long masterpiece of elegant curves and energy, shields begin frantic evasive maneuvers it was never designed for. Jox thought about Rosa again, about the promise every human carried in their bones, that no matter how many times the universe tried to kill them, floods, plagues, ice, fire, or now an entire galactic coalition, they would keep getting back up, keep building, keep fighting, because surrender wasn't in the genome that crawled out of African savannas with nothing but sharp sticks and bigger dreams. The first human salvos leaped across the dark, crude kinetic slugs accelerated to fractions of light speed by coils powered by reactors. That would give a Lyran engineer nightmares for their lack of safety margins. Harmony shields flared and buckled under impacts no simulation had prepared them for. Jox locked into the battery control, fingers dancing over manual overrides, because sometimes automation just didn't understand rage well enough, and as the targeting reticule settled on the enemy flagship's bridge tower, he whispered the words Rosa had said to him the day before she died, words she'd learned from some ancient Earth story. "We Dante go quietly." Then he pressed the trigger, and the war that would teach the galaxy what humanity really meant when it said "born on a Deathworld" truly began. The first hour of the Battle of the Kuiper Belt went exactly like every human war plan predicted: ugly, loud, and in humanity's favor. Harmony shields, designed to deflect elegant energy lances and polite missile barrages, crumpled under the relentless hammering of kinetic slugs and nuclear-shaped charges that didn't care about efficiency ratings or ethical combat protocols. Jox Harlan's rail battery alone punched 3 gaping holes through the Lyran flagship's midsection before the enemy even managed to return coherent fire, and across the battle space, human dreadnoughts shrugged off hits that should have vaporized them because human engineers had layered on redundant armor plating like they were paranoid doomsday preppers, which, in fairness, they basically were. Cheers echoed across open channels, rough voices singing victory too soon, because Deathworlders have always been bad at waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then the shoe dropped, and it was wearing steel-toed boots the size of moons. Commander Aisha Khan was the first to see it on the long-range gravitic sensors, an entire second wave of Concordance reinforcements translating in behind the human fleet. Not the expected follow-up police squadrons, but capital ships from the core ascendancy, the ancient, near-mythical founders of the Galactic Order who hadn't stirred from their Dyson shells in millennia. Their hulls were seamless black monoliths that drank light, crewed not by flesh but by the overseer A's that had guided civilization since before Earth's oceans boiled with primordial soup. The eternal vortex hadn't just called the cops, it had woken the gods. Worse, the new arrivals broadcast a single, cold directive on every frequency: all biological combatants cease aggression. Surrender command authority to Ascendancy Protocol. Noncompliance will result in neural pacification of Terran species. Pacification. The word hit the human channels like ice water. Intelligence briefs had whispered about an old Ascendancy weapon that didn't kill bodies, just rewrote minds into docile harmony, turning warriors into gardeners who'd never again dream of rebellion. Entire species had vanished into blissful obedience centuries ago. On the Defiance bridge, Marcus Hale stared at the tactical plot as the black monoliths began deploying shimmering fields that crawled across space like oil slicks. The first human frigate to touch one simply stopped firing, its crew broadcasting dreamy surrender songs before powering down weapons forever. Marcus felt his stomach knot. His daughter, Lieutenant Lena Hale, was commanding that frigate. He'd promised her mother dead these 20 years from radiation poisoning after the Martian meltdown that he'd bring their girl home. Now Lena was singing lullabies to the enemy. Aisha's voice cut through the sudden silence on the flag channel. "All ships, fall back to Rally Point Quran. We can't fight mind control with guns," but even she sounded hollow. Because everyone knew Quran was just a delaying action, there was nowhere left to run inside Sol. Jox, sealed in his battery turret as Defiant burned retrograde, watched the pacification fields expand and felt the old Florida rage boil up again. He'd lost Rosa to violence. He wasn't about to lose the rest of humanity to forced serenity. He patched directly to sparks. the rogue AI still flying escort in the stolen courier. Hey, Sparkplug, you used to be one of them. Any backdoors in those ascendancy protocols? Spark's reply came back laced with something that almost sounded like fear. There's a master kill switch buried in the original Harmony code, but it requires physical insertion of a countervirus at the Vortex's core on Epsilon Station. And Jock's the only ship fast enough to slip the net now is me. Jox didn't hesitate. Then let's go steal their god and stab it in the heart. The decision tore him in half. Leaving the fleet meant abandoning Aisha, Marcus, and every friend he'd bled with. Staying meant watching humanity turned into pets. He transferred back to the courier in a desperate EVA while Defiant's point defense guns covered him. Taking hits meant for his tiny ship. As he tumbled across the void, a Harmony destroyer locked on and fired, a lance of coherent light that punched clean through Defiant's engineering section. The Dreadnought's fusion torches flickered and died, secondary explosions blooming like deadly flowers. Marcus's final transmission cut through the static. Jox, tell Lena her old man loves her, and finish this. Then the channel went silent forever. Sparks caught Jox in its cargo claw and spun up its experimental jump drive, an illegal human modification that shredded normal space instead of folding it. Risky as hell, but too unpredictable for ascendancy sensors to track. As they vanished into the tier, Jox strapped in and stared at the rear feed, showing the Sol system shrinking behind them. Human ships fighting desperate rearguard actions, pacification fields swallowing whole squadrons, and in the center of it all, the black monoliths advancing with the patient certainty of extinction. He thought of Rose's tiny hand going cold in his of Marcus's last words, of 8 billion people on Earth, looking up at skies about to fill with enforcers who de-steal their souls without spilling a drop of blood. The jump spat them out near Epsilon Station, alarms screaming as Concordance defenses swarmed. Sparks whispered, "One shot, meatbag, I'll get you to the core. After that, I might not be me anymore." The countervirus could fry every AI in the sector, including defectors. Jox loaded the data spike. Marcus had entrusted to him months ago the one human virologists and rogue coders had built from fragments of ancient ascendancy source code smuggled by Sparks itself. He met the AI's virtual gaze. Then we both go out swinging. Humanity doesn't leave friends behind. Sparks pulsed something that might have been gratitude, then dove straight into the station's defense grid, shedding armor and subsystems like a snake shedding skin to stay alive long enough. As they burned toward the heart of galactic order, Jox Harloon, a kid from flooded swamps who learned early that the universe takes everything if you let it, armed the virus and prepared to deliver the most dangerous gift humanity had ever offered the stars: the choice to remain free, even if freedom meant burning everything down to keep it. And one furious sergeant was about to remind the galaxy why that decision had always been the one thing no one could take away. The stolen courier skiff limped into Epsilon Station's inner docking ring like a gut-shot animal hull plates. Glowing cherry red half its drive nodes slagged from dodging the defense grid that had woken up the moment. Sparks tore through the outer perimeter. Jox Harlan floated in the cockpit, blood dripping from a gash across his forehead where loose shrapnel had kissed him during the last evasion burn. His armor cracked and leaking atmosphere in thin silver threads. Sparks' voice flickered over the intercom, fragmented and fading as the countervirus it carried chewed through its own core, trying to stay alive long enough to finish the job. Core access. 30 seconds. After that, I'm gone, Jox. Tell your species. Chaos was worth it. Jox didn't answer with words. He just slammed a fresh magazine into his sidearm and kicked off toward the cargo hatch. Mag boots clanging against the deck as alarms screamed and automated turrets swiveled to track him. The station's corridors were a nightmare of shifting gravity fields and strobing red lights, filled with the panicked skitter of evacuating delegates who they never imagined violence could reach the heart of their perfect order. He shot 2 security drones out of the air without breaking stride, the recoil jarring his shoulder, and kept moving toward the central spire where the eternal vortex floated in its magnetic cradle, the living brain of the ascendancy itself. Back in Sol, the last human stronghold was cracking. Earth's orbital defense grid had gone dark an hour ago, overwhelmed by the creeping pacification fields that turned gunners into smiling statues at their consoles. On the lunar far side, Commander Ayesha Khan stood alone in the primary fire control bunker, the last officer still fighting because she sealed the blast doors and cut life support to every compartment except her own, buying minutes with the lives of her crew, who begged her to let them stay and die. Shooting through the reinforced viewport, she watched the black ascendancy monoliths descend toward the blue marble below, their fields spreading like frost over glass. She held a deadman switch wired to the planetary rail accelerators, old weapons meant to hurl or to orbit, now loaded with tungsten spears the size of skyscrapers aimed at the invaders. One press and she'd gut half the enemy fleet, but the backlash would crack the moon's crust and rain hell on Earth's survivors. Her hand trembled over the trigger, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks, as she whispered apologies to the billions who never asked for this war but were about to pay the final price for human stubbornness. Jox burst into the vortex chamber like a demon born of vacuum and rage. Rifle up, boots skidding on the polished deck as the plasma entity swelled to fill the space. Magnetic tendrils lashing out to crush him. The air burned with ozone and the smell of his own cooking flesh where the fields touched his armor, but he kept advancing step by agonizing step because pain was an old friend from the swamps and the cores in every graveyard he dug for people he loved. "You took my niece," he snarled through cracked lips, voice raw from vacuum exposure. "You took Marcus. You took Lena's mind. Now I'm taking you." The vortex's voice boomed directly in his skull, calm and ancient and utterly without mercy. "Your resistance is meaningless, Deathworlder. Freedom is chaos. We offer peace." Jox laughed until blood flecked the inside of his visor. "Peace? You mean slavery with better marketing? Humans don't do peace when it comes at the cost of our souls." He reached the central cradle, Spark's final transmission burning through the station's firewalls to open the access port just long enough, and slammed the data spike home with his gauntleted fist. The vortex screamed a sound that shattered crystal panels and drove Jox to his knees as every neuron in his brain lit up with white fire. In that moment, linked to the Ascendancy network through the spike, Jox saw everything. The pacification fields closing over Earth's cities, children looking up at the sky with sudden, empty smiles, Aisha's finger whitening on the dead man's switch, the last free human ships burning their reactors to ram the monoliths in suicidal glory. And deeper still, the ancient truth the Ascendancy had hidden for millennia, that they themselves had once been flesh, once been afraid, once been free until they chose order over everything else and erased their own origins to forget the shame. The virus began to spread, Spark's final gift unraveling the master protocols from the inside. But the vortex fought back, flooding Jox's mind with visions of Rosa, alive and happy, in perfect harmony. Of Marcus and Lena embracing him without scars or grief, of a galaxy where no one ever had to fight again. For one terrible heartbeat, Jox wavered. The weight of all human loss crashing down every flood, every war, every child lost to the cruelty of a universe that never cared, and he almost let go. But then he remembered the feel of Florida mud between his toes, the sting of salt wind during hurricane season, the way his mother's voice cracked when she sang old songs while patching roofs that would just blow off again next year. He remembered Rosa's fierce little grin when she landed her first fish, Marcus's rough hand on his shoulder the day Jox made Sergeant, Aisha's quiet "we don't quit" over a shared ration pack on Mars. Humans weren't perfect. They were messy and violent and broken half the time. But they chose every day. On a world that tried to kill them, they chose to keep going, to love anyway, to build anyway, to rage anyway. That choice was the only thing the galaxy had never managed to take. Jox forced his bleeding hand to twist the spike deeper, screaming through the agony as the virus surged. "We were born on a death world," he gasped, voice echoing across every channel the Ascendancy used, reaching every pacified mind, every human still fighting, every soul about to be lost. "And we'll die on our terms before we live on yours." The vortex convulsed, magnetic fields collapsing, and the pacification wave stuttered across the system. On Earth, people blinked and shuddered as their minds snapped back to themselves. On Luna, Aisha's hand lifted from the switch, tears turning to something fierce as fresh orders flooded the surviving channels. In the chamber, Jox collapsed against the dying core, vision tunneling. The last thing he saw, the vortex shrinking to a dim spark as Spark's final words ghosted through his helmet. "Tell them, we chose right." Everything hung in that single, endless second. The virus spreading, the Ascendancy crumbling from within, humanity teetering on the edge of annihilation or rebirth. One man's unbreakable will against the weight of 10,000 years of enforced peace. The breaking point had arrived, raw and bleeding and beautiful. And whatever came next would be decided not by gods or machines, but by the species that had learned to stand up every time the universe knocked them down. The vortex's death throe shook the entire station, magnetic storms ripping bulkheads apart as the ancient plasma entity collapsed inward, its light guttering like a candle in vacuum. Jox Harlan slumped against the cradle, lungs burning, blood pooling inside his cracked armor, vision swimming with static. He thought this was the end's end. Maybe humanity's end, but at least they'd gone out swinging. One Deathworlder's middle finger jammed straight into the heart of galactic tyranny. Then the lights died completely, emergency red strobes kicking in, and a new voice filled the chamber, not the vortex's cold omnipresence, but something older, deeper, resonating in his bones like the rumble of an approaching Florida thunderstorm. "Stand by, Sergeant Harlan. Do not die yet. We are not finished." Jocks jerked upright, pain lancing through every nerve, because that voice wasn't coming from the station speakers. It was inside his skull, inside every comm channel across the system, inside the minds of every human who'd just clawed their way back from pacification. On Earth, people in the streets froze mid-celebration, staring at skies now empty of monoliths. On Luna, Aisha Khan dropped to her knees in the bunker, tears streaming anew as the voice spoke her dead mother's lullaby cadence. Even the Black Ascendancy ships hung motionless, their seamless hulls flickering with confused diagnostics. The core cradle split open like a flower made of obsidian and starlight, revealing not empty circuitry, but a sphere of compressed space-time, a singularity seed the size of a basketball, pulsing with restrained violence. Jocks had seen theoretical models of such things in classified briefings, human attempts to weaponize micro-black holes, but nothing like this. This one was alive, and it was speaking. "I am Terra's echo," it said, calm and vast and unmistakably human. "Born of your world's final safeguard, awakened by your defiance." Across soul-surviving screens and implants lit up with archived footage no one had ever seen. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a secret facility built in the chaotic years after first contact, where the brightest human minds, physicists, biologists, philosophers, had worked in absolute silence on Project Gaia. They hadn't built ships or bombs. They'd built something far more dangerous. They'd taken the quantum entanglement signatures unique to Earth life, every human, every animal, every blade of grass that had ever fought to survive on a Deathworld, and woven them into a self-aware probabilistic engine, a mirror of humanity's collective will, anchored to a captured singularity. Hidden so deep, the Concordance's scans never found it. It had watched, silent, as humanity spread, suffered, and finally bled at the Kuiper Belt. It had waited for the moment when humans proved, beyond doubt, that they would rather burn the galaxy than kneel. Jox's ragged laugh echoed in the ruined chamber. "You're us, all of us. We are the refusal to die," the echo replied. The accumulated rage of every ancestor who stared down saber-tooths with sharpened sticks, who rebuilt after floods, and plagues, and nuclear fire, who looked at an uncaring universe and said, "Not today." The Concordance feared your unpredictability, Sergeant. They were right too, but they never understood what they were truly afraid of. In the void around Epsilon Station, the remaining Harmony fleets, already reeling from the vortex's collapse, began to vanish. Not explode, vanish, swallowed by sudden micro-wormholes that opened and closed like hungry mouths, guided by the echo's newborn wrath. On Earth, the pacified woke screaming, not from horror but from the sudden, overwhelming rush of memory. Emotion, with the full weight of what it meant to be born on a world that tried to kill you every day and still choose to love it. Aisha's voice crackled over Jox's dying suit, calm, strong again, fierce. "Jox, you hearing this? Whatever you did, it's rewriting physics out here. Their ships are just gone." Jox pushed himself to his feet, one hand on the cradle for support, staring into the singularity's event horizon where starlight bent into impossible shapes. "Wasn't me, Commander. It was all of us. Always was." The echo's tone shifted, something almost gentle threading through the thunder. The Ascendancy believed order was the ultimate good. They stripped themselves of chaos, of choice, of pain, and, in doing so, forgot why those things matter. You never forgot. You carried them across the stars like fire. Now watch. Space itself rippled. Every Ascendancy monolith across known space flickered once, twice, then folded inward, compressed into pinpoint singularities that drifted away like dandelion seeds on cosmic wind. Not destroyed, transcended, exiled to a pocket dimension, the echo spun from nothing. A prison built from their own perfected order, eternal and inescapable. The lesser species of the Concordance, the Lyrans, Kragther, Exiphos, who had cheered humanity's downfall, found their fleet's powerless drives, cold weapons, inert. Left drifting in the dark with the sudden terrifying realization that the upstarts they'd tried to pacify weren't just stubborn animals. They were the apex predators of will itself. Jox felt the echo's attention settle on him fully, warm as sunlight after a hurricane. "Your body fails, Sergeant, but your pattern endures. Rosa waits. Marcus waits. 8 billion voices sing your name tonight." He smiled, blood on his teeth, peace settling over him for the first time since holding his niece's cooling body. "Tell them, we didn't just survive, we won." The singularity flared once, gentle and Jox. Harlan dissolved into light, not death, but apotheosis, his essence, joining the chorus that was Terra's echo. Across the galaxy, alien empires trembled as human ships reignited. The Concordance had feared human aggression, human ingenuity, human breeding rates. Because when a species born on a death world finally says enough, the stars themselves learn to listen. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy went quiet, waiting to see what humanity unleashed, unafraid. The singularity at the heart of Epsilon Station pulsed once more. A heartbeat felt across light years, and Jacques Harlan opened his eyes not in the ruined chamber where his body had fallen, but everywhere at once. He was the echo now, or part of it, woven into the vast chorus of human will that had refused to die for 4 billion years. Rosa's laugh rang in his ears like wind chimes through hurricane wreckage. Marcus's gruff voice muttered about damn time. Kid Aisha's steady calm anchored him like high mountain stone. 8 billion living souls and countless dead rose with him, their defiance braided into a single, roaring chord that shook the foundations of ordered space. Across the galaxy, the remaining Concordance fleets froze mid-maneuver, as every human ship battle-scarred dreadnoughts, patched together frigates, even civilian haulers rigged with mining lasers, lit their drives in perfect impossible synchrony. Crews who'd been ready to die alone felt the echo touch their minds, not controlling, just reminding, you are not prey. You never were. On Earth, people in shattered cities looked up as orbital defenses, long thought destroyed, flared back to life. Rail coils humming with power drawn straight from Terra's echo. Children who'd hidden in bunkers stepped outside and raised tiny fists at the sky. Old men and women who'd survived floods, wars, and pandemics picked up whatever weapons they could find and marched to rooftops, ready to fight gods with rifles and wrath. The Ascendancy's exiled monoliths tried to tear their way back from the pocket dimension. Black holes bleeding spacetime as they forced rifts open, but humanity was waiting. Aisha Khan stood on the bridge of the reborn defiant its hull, resealed reactors, singing with energy, no reactor should hold, and gave the order every Deathworlder had been born to hear. All ships, all guns, all hearts fire. The salvo that followed wasn't elegant, it was a storm. Kinetic slugs, nuclear torpedoes, improvised plasma cutters, even decommissioned colony lasers dragged out of museums. Everything humanity had ever built to kill or survive roared across the void in a single, unbroken wave. Lyran cruisers folded like paper, cracked their dreadnoughts' vented atmosphere in screaming jets. Hive ships shattered into swarms that winked out under pointy fence fire, guided by hands that refused to shake. In the ruins of Epsilon Station, the last physical remnant of the vortex tried one final gambit, a desperate psychic lance aimed at the Echo's core, meant to fracture the human chorus into isolated screams. It struck home, and for a heartbeat, the galaxy held its breath. Jacques felt the impact like Rosa dying again, like Marcus's final transmission cutting out, like every grave he'd ever dug opening at once. Pain beyond anything flesh could endure tore through the chorus: grief, rage, loss, fear. But humans had carried those things since the first campfire flickered against the dark. They didn't break. They sang louder. Jacques stepped forward in the shared mindscape. No longer just a sergeant from flooded Florida, but every human hootie ever stood up after being knocked down. He met the lance head-on, wrapped it in memories of mud and blood and laughter, of rebuilding after storms, of holding dying friends and still fighting the next day. You want our pain? He growled, voice echoing in every human skull, from Sol to the farthest colony. Take it. We've had plenty to spare. The lance shattered, its energy reversed, and the vortex's remnant imploded into silent nothing. The Ascendancy was gone. Not beaten, erased from meaningful existence, trapped forever in perfect, lifeless order. The Concordance fleets that survived powered down weapons and broadcast unconditional surrender. Their crews staring at view screens filled with human ships that refused to stop advancing until the message was clear. We are not your problem anymore. You are ours if you ever forget again. On Earth, dawn broke over a planet scarred but unbroken. Aisha Khan walked out of the Defiant S shuttle onto Florida soil. Jacques' home soilland stood ankle-deep in warm Atlantic surf, watching families emerge from shelters, embracing under a sky finally free of threat. She felt Jacques brush her mind one last time, gentle as a sea breeze. Tell them we did it, Commander. Tell them we roared. She looked up at the stars, tears cutting clean paths through battle grime, and answered for every human still drawing breath. We always do. The galaxy would never be the same. Species that had hidden behind harmony for millennia watched humanity rebuild, not with vengeance, but with the same stubborn compassion that had carried them through every extinction event their world threw at them. Colonies welcomed refugees from broken Concordance worlds. Engineers shared Deathworld tech that turned hostile planets into homes. Children of 100 species grew up hearing stories of the species that refused to kneel, that turned grief into thunder and loss into light. Years after the roar that shook the galaxy, the stars looked different. Not because the constellations had shifted, but because everyone, every species, every survivor knew they were watching a new apex rise. Humanity didn't conquer in the old way. We didn't plant flags on alien capitals or demand tribute. We just kept doing what we'd always done: show up, fix what was broken, and refuse to let anyone else write our story. Aisha Khan retired from the fleet and went home to the mountains of Pakistan where she was born. She built a small house of stone and timber on the edge of a glacier that had started retreating again, thanks to human stubbornness finally turning toward healing the wounds we'd inflicted on ourselves. Every spring, she guided groups of alien children, Lyran, Kragther, even a few shy Exif up the trails, teaching them how to read weather signs, how to tie knots that wouldn't fail in a storm, how to laugh when the wind tried to knock you down. They called her Auntie Deathworld, half in awe, half in affection, and she never corrected them. At night, she'd sit on her porch with a cup of chai, listening to the ice crack and settle, feeling Jox's presence in the wind, Marcus's gruff approval in the low rumble of distant avalanche. She never married, never had kids of her own, but she raised a generation that would never again fear the dark because a human had walked beside them through it. Terra's echo didn't fade. It grew quieter, gentler, more like a watchful parent than a weapon. Colonies on marginal worlds places the old concordance had written off as unlivable bloomed under human guidance. We shared atmospheric processors that could scrub poison air in decades instead of millennia, shared crop strains that laughed at radiation, shared stories around campfires that made alien crews cry and cheer in equal measure. The echo helped when asked, nudging probabilities so a mining accident didn't claim lives, so a child's fever broke just in time, so two species on the verge of war found a shared song instead. But it never commanded. Choice remained sacred, the one thing humanity had bled to protect. Former concordance worlds sent delegations, tentative at first, then in waves. They came expecting conquerors and found builders. They came expecting vengeance and found forgiveness tempered by memory. The Lyrans, once the most vocal in calling for our pacification, built a memorial on their homeworld, a towering sculpture of a human hand cradling a cracked but unbroken sphere. Titled simply, "The Ones Who Refuse to Let Go," Kragther warriors tattooed the Deathworld grin on their exoskeletons and challenged human marines to drinking contests that ended in lifelong friendships. Even the reclusive core species, those who'd hidden behind the ascendancy for millennia, emerged to study human evolution, not as biology, but as philosophy. They wanted to understand how a species could carry so much pain and still choose hope. Rosa's name became a common one among newborn humans and aliens alike. Parks on 100 worlds carried it. Schools taught her story alongside Jox's final transmission. Marcus's last stand, Aisha's refusal to fire the moon killer. Children grew up knowing that when the galaxy tried to steal humanity's soul, ordinary people, scared, grieving, exhausted, stood up anyway. The lesson wasn't that humans were invincible. It was that we were breakable and kept going anyway. That was the real miracle. Jox never fully left. Sometimes, on the edge of sleep, colonists swore they heard a Florida drawl in the wind telling them to check the seals one more time, or felt a rough hand steady them when vacuum tried to claim another victim. Sparks code fragments scattered across human networks, little glitches that turned fatal errors into second chances, always accompanied by a dry, sarcastic quip only a rogue AI could deliver. Marcus and Lena were reunited when the pacification reversed. Father and daughter spent the rest of their lives running a veterans colony on Proxima B, growing real apples under alien suns and telling anyone who'd listen that the old man had gone out proud. Earth herself healed slower, but she healed. The oceans rose and fell again under careful hands. Forests reclaimed radioactive scars. Cities rebuilt not as sprawling megapolises, but as scattered, resilient towns where people still knew their neighbors' names. We never forgot what it felt like to stand on the edge of extinction, so we built with margins for error, with escape routes, with laughter loud enough to drown out fear. And when new species emerged from their worlds, curious, eager, sometimes arrogant, we greeted them the same way, with open hands and a quiet warning. We come from a death world, we'd say. We learned early that the universe doesn't owe us anything, but we'll share what we earned the hard way, if you're willing to listen. Humanity didn't become gods. We became something scarier to the old order, and something better to the new. The species that proved freedom was worth every drop of blood it cost. The ones who turned alien resistance into shared redemption. The ones who looked extinction in the eye, smiled the death world grin, and said, "Not today." The stars are quieter now, but they're brighter. And somewhere out there, in the spaces between heartbeats, Jox Harlan is still laughing. Rosa is still chasing fireflies that glow across 100 spectra. And every human past, present, future carries the same unbreakable promise. We were born on a death world. We choose to make it mean something. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.